Welcome to the Legalpreneur podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Sager, founder and CEO of Legalpreneur Inc. As a serial entrepreneur and someone that works exclusively with small business owners legally protecting their business, I'm dedicated to covering common legal issues faced by business owners, providing you with the business knowledge you need to catapult your business's growth and showing you just how some of the world's most elite entrepreneurs have handled these legal and business issues themselves. In true attorney fashion, the information in this episode is not legal advice. This is for informational purposes only, and you should always consult with your attorney before implementing any of the information in the show. Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Legalpreneur podcast. Today I am joined by an amazing brand designer, Tiffany Neuman. She is behind the scenes with a lot of big brands that you may not really know that she's behind them, but she is the magic behind them. I have been working with Tiffany for a little over a year now, and we were introduced together through Selena Sue, who we both know and love, and super excited to have her on the podcast today. Thanks for joining me, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Andrea. I'm excited.
Me too. I'm so excited to hear your whole background, because we haven't really talked a whole lot about your background, but go ahead and give us the rundown. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's an interesting but not super exciting story. So I was a creative director for Fortune 500 companies such as Burt's Bees, Adidas, Chase Bank, Stoli Vodka, and a lot more, a ton of big brands for about 15 years. So I had worked my way up from intern into creative director and ran a team of like 30 people all over the country, was flying all over the place. And I was like living my dream life. Like that was my goal. That was super exciting. I manifested that. And then I had my daughter. And so for those of us who have children, we know that that changes everything. And I was like, I cannot travel this much. Like I have a baby at home. And so I realized that I was an entrepreneur when I joined a mastermind to determine how to kind of exit corporate. And I was going to target like startup companies, and I'm really into virtual reality and all of those things. So I got a few clients in that space. And when I joined this mastermind, people started asking me questions, just entrepreneurs, small business owners. And so I started supporting some of them. And I realized I love the work so much. I was like, oh, these are my people. This is who I'm meant to be working with. And so I slowly exited. I trained my replacement in corporate, went down to part time, started my business. So it wasn't like this harsh exit. And yeah, the rest is history. So I officially left 3 years ago. So it grew pretty quickly after that.
That's incredible. I don't know why you think that's not interesting. Like, that's awesome to work with those huge companies and just that's a fun life. So tell everybody more about what exactly do you do? Is it what you do now? And I would love to see the comparison. Like, what exactly did you do for those larger companies? Because as
Mm.
Legalpreneur is transitioning into startup mode, I would love to hear, like, what was the work that you were doing for those companies versus, like, is it the same or is it different than what you're doing now?
Ooh, that's such a good question. So yeah, in the big companies, most of them were pre-existing, obviously. So I wasn't developing brands. It was more brand strategy, trend prediction, campaigns like advertising campaigns, and new product launches. So like if a new shoe came out at Adidas, a new, Stoli vodka, it would be like their new promotions. So it was is very much like maintaining the brand. So that's what I was. It was really like brand extensions and just working with really amazing people, creative. It was very fun. So the transition, it was definitely hard to leave because it was like my dream life, or so I thought. But I knew I just craved that freedom, and we have seasons in our life, and so I was grateful for that opportunity. And then it was like starting over though. I felt like a kindergartner when I came into entrepreneurship because I was promoting myself instead of these big companies. And then there's so much to learn about. It's just so different when you're marketing for yourself than a big company. So that really gave me the tools that I use now of like what it's like. It is different to be a personal brand, to promote yourself. And now I really help people either create brands from scratch, or most often it's more of like a reinvention. So you mentioned Selena Sue earlier, like she already had Impacting Millions. So I just helped her elevate it, streamline it, and kind of bring it to what I call a legacy brand. And so that's really the framework that I've developed, and you are helping me trademark. And we can talk about that too. I could talk about how important trademarks are forever. But so that's really what I do, is working with people who want to really step into their legacy through their brand and create what appears to be a thought leadership brand, and really step into that thought leadership by having a brand that serves them for the long run, so they don't have to keep reinventing the wheel all the time and like changing their branding. And also just education, because people think of branding as like a logo and a website, and really there's so much more to it.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about your legacy foundation and your framework there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the antithesis of like, the corporate background and working with online entrepreneurs. We really, well, I say we, it was really me at the beginning. Now I have a team. I really realized that there was patterns that people were going through. So that foundations is really getting the core of your messaging down first. Your vision, your values, your voice, your brand story, your personal story, all those things that are below. Like if you picture an iceberg, there's all of these things that are invisible that are below the surface. And most people skip right to the logo and the visuals, which is like what we see above the surface. And then they wonder why either the brand isn't working for them, and or it never feels like really good to them, like it doesn't feel like it's really their essence. And that's because you don't know what you don't know, and you just skipped the portions that are really important. So that framework walks through all of those. So it's actually a pyramid, and going through all the steps. And one of the steps, for instance, is even like the messy middle. Everybody who goes through the branding process, it's really a self-development, personal development process. And most people get really confused and like have an identity crisis during the process. Like, wait, who am I? Like, what am I here to do? Like, it's so common that I actually made that a part of the process. So people expect it, and I can help them through it. And so they're not freaking out, because so many people start and then they give up because they're like, oh, this is just too confusing. And I always say you can't see the label inside the bottle, because it's hard to have an objective view when it's like you're branding yourself. So that's all included in the process.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and I feel like now that we're going through some rebranding stuff, like we were scheduling calls with like copywriters and going through and answering questions like, "What's your favorite thing about your brand?" How am I supposed to answer that? Like, what do you mean, what's the favorite thing about my brand? Everything. Like, we love our brands. But like really digging into those questions, it's a good exercise. I know that.
Copywriters love when people do their brand right. So like I have a whole brand manual that, so when clients go to a copywriter or Facebook ads manager, they're like, here's our stuff, here's our voice, here's our language. Otherwise, I mean, a lot of copywriters will do that work with you, but it saves that hassle. Or if you have a team, like for now, I have a team of 8 people. They have my brand manual, my brand guide. So I don't have to post on Instagram. I don't have to like do all of that, because they can mimic the brand for me now, which is huge. It just takes so much off my plate.
Yeah, and let's talk about your team. When did you start bringing on your team? How has that grown? That's incredible having a team of 8. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. It really happened organically. Like when I was pulling my hair out, like working all night, to be honest, to be really transparent. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. Because when I started, I was like, I'm tired of this. Is like literally what happened when I left corporate. I was like, I'm tired of running a team. I just want to get back into the creative work. So I literally came back and started doing all the work myself, only to realize that the only way to do it was to have a team. So it was like full circle. It was pretty hilarious looking back of how naive I was, thinking I could do, like make a really amazing business by myself. So yeah, it was just like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Hire, support like with design. Now I have to hire a web developer. Now I'm hiring a project manager, a copywriter. So now we really are a small full service agency. So we can do, the messaging, the branding, the websites, and everything all in one, which is really cool. And I don't have to pull my hair out all the
That's
time.
exciting. Yeah. That's the best feeling. So I'm curious, like when did you make that first hire? So you started your business 3 years ago. I think it's cool for the audience to hear, like, okay, you started 3 years ago. Now you have a team of 8. When did you start hiring?
It's a great question. I wish I could go back in time. I think probably within 6 months, I realized that I was getting out of like my head in the water because I met some really amazing people in my mastermind, and it just started kind of when they got good results. Like I've grown mostly organically. I've never ran Facebook ads. I've never done anything. It's been mostly word of mouth. So I was like, I think I had like 10 people wanting websites, and I was like, I can't do this. So my first hire was honestly a web designer to help with that piece. And then now my role is back in the creative direction. So I'm not actually doing the work, but I'm still like get to manage the creative piece, which I love so much. So that was my first hire. I think it was around 6 months.
Nice. And do you have, so can you talk about what positions you have hired now?
Yeah. So I have that position. I recently hired a copywriter because, like, just like you were talking about, when we were doing websites for people, I would say, well, you can either write your own copy or hire a copywriter. And I had so many people like have negative experiences or try to do it themselves. And they're like, I can't do this. And I'm great at nailing like the messaging overall, but I'm not a copywriter for websites. So I realized that like everybody was asking me, can't I just work with somebody you know? So I was like, oh, okay, this is needed as well. So we brought her on. I have a content manager for my own content. I have a project manager, a web developer, let's see, a social media person, and oh, now I have a partner coach as well. So because I was growing so organically, I implemented a partner program. And so it's really amazing just to have past clients sharing the word, or people who want to share the word out, and then they get a commission. And so that was a lot to manage as well. So I have somebody on the team managing that.
That's awesome. Congrats to have that whole team. I know it's an amazing feeling too, being able to say like this person does this, because I know when we start our business, we want to be everything, but then we quickly realize we can't be everything. So once we start
Absolutely.
hiring, it just takes a load off. Yeah, and we're able to really get into what we're good at. And you recently, well, I guess a year ago, finally started taking care of some legal stuff. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was so grateful when I was working with Selena and doing her brand. I met you, and this is a little embarrassing to admit, but again, there's so many things thrown at us when we have a business. And so I know how important legal is. Like, I knew that in corporate. I mean, people would spend, those brands would spend millions of dollars on their brand. They would spend millions of dollars on legal, protecting their assets. But here I was, and I'm like, oh, just like a single person. Like, there's, it'll be okay. Like, all the other things in my head were more of a priority, until I found out that somebody was basically taking my IP, which is the legacy brand, and making a business out of it. And it was actually somebody I knew, not very well, but yeah. And so that triggered it in me. And I was like, okay, I guess this is way more important than I realized. So now I preach it to all of my clients, which I had always said, like, when you find a name, make sure you do a search and make sure you're not infringing on anybody else's copyright. You should probably trademark, but I wasn't even practicing what I was preaching. And now I'm realizing it really is, as soon as, like, when my clients and I come up with a name for their business or for their program or whatever, it's like, first thing you do a search, and then go talk to Andrea to get your copywriting, because, or your trademark, because it is that important. I think so many people wait too long, and then they can't protect it anymore.
Yeah, and luckily for you, like we're still able to protect it. It just what happens is it's like, look, if we do it from the beginning, typically it's a much smoother process. If you wait until something happens, then you have to spend more money, takes longer. And then if you wait too long, which I've actually had this happen with one client where she had her business for like 10 plus years, never did anything, and then finally came to me and it was just way too long and somebody else was using it, somebody else had the trademark for way too long. And I was like, I'm sorry, girlfriend, but you
Oh
are
man.
kind of SOL here. And that's like the ultimate client horror story, the ultimate, like, this is the worst thing that can happen. I've had that once. And I always tell people, like, I'm not here to tell you, like, make you think the worst thing is going to happen, but you have to protect yourself as if it were to happen because I've seen the worst thing happen and it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah.
And you, as a brand designer, you know how awful it is having to, not awful, but how tough it is to rebrand because you spend so much time and energy. And I'm curious, have you had to work with clients after they've already like built out their brand, built out everything, and then they come back because they're like, I have to rebrand?
I honestly haven't, not that I know of, at least nobody's mentioned that they had to rebrand for that reason. It's usually because they want to, like it was outdated or it didn't feel right or what have you. But I have had people in the process realize during the process because they didn't work with a lawyer or something and they did a quick search and they're like, oh, the name's fine. And I'm like, okay, we're going to make these logos for you, only to find out later that it was. So we've had to redo a few, like, not main brands usually, but we've done a few like offer names, um, and had to rename those because of that reason.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. And people don't realize, and a lot of times until it's too late. Um,
Mhm.
It happens. So another thing I want to ask you, because you mentioned you joined a mastermind even before leaving corporate. And I did a podcast episode, a month or so ago about masterminds. And people, I think it really resonated with a lot of business owners because they everybody hears about masterminds and but it's hard to know which mastermind should I join? How do I, like, is it worth it? So I'm curious, how did you find your mastermind and how did it benefit you?
Yeah. So my first actually, I joined two, which is a little crazy. And I invested a ton of money, but I was like, if I'm going to figure out how to do this, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do it quickly. And they kind of it just happened organically, to be honest. And looking back, I think I would have done a little bit more research. Like I got so much value and I wouldn't be where I'm at without them. But now I am much more strategic with the masterminds. Like I'm not in those masterminds anymore. I have a new one and it's really aligned with my values. It's really leading me to where I want to go and the evolution that I want to create. And the format to me was really different and unique. And so I think there's a lot of amazing masterminds out there, but there's a lot of masterminds that don't give as much value for what you're paying. And so I think just to make sure, like I'll also run a mastermind now because some of my branding clients were like, oh, we want to keep working with you. And I have a group program where I take people through the brand messaging. So that leads into the mastermind. And during COVID, one of my cohorts was just like, we want to keep doing this work. So like the mastermind was just kind of born off after that. And so that's where I'm always trying to think about too is how can you be different up level, either if you're running a mastermind or if you're going to choose to be part of one. Yeah, like what's involved, what are you truly getting, and also the connections. Like honestly, some of the one of the masterminds I was in wasn't really that valuable in far as what I learned, but the connections I made and the people I met was so amazing. It was 100% worth it.
Yeah, that's what I tell people too. It's like it's yes, you want to get value from what you're learning, but also it's who's in the room with you because that could be worth it alone. And it sounds like you got that value as well. Amazing. Yeah, I love
Definitely.
masterminds. I always talk about my mastermind with Chris Harder. I've been in it now, I think 3 or 4 years, and I will probably be in it till I die or until he stops it. Um, just like you, I wouldn't be where I am today without Chris Harder's mastermind. And because it's who's in the room, his introductions, like he's incredible. But okay, so the one thing I ask everybody is for one business tip. Doesn't have to be about the legal stuff. It doesn't even have to be about like your specific branding stuff. Just your number one business tip that you, if somebody came to you, is like, Tiffany, what's the number one business tip you have? What you got?
Mm, gosh, I feel like I have so many, but the first one that comes to mind is to be consistent. So that could really mean anything on social media, on whatever, but especially because I look through everything through the lens of branding, that consistency in the way that you're showing up, how you show up, how you're speaking, and just really everything that you're doing will really help you for the long term. So like the thought leaders that a lot of people look up to, like Marie Forleo, and I don't know, even like people like Brene Brown, and Oprah is a great example. Like she's just consistent, always going, always moving forward, always putting us stuff out there. And it may change and evolve, but that's okay. And that's really what I think is important for people. It's oftentimes we look at and we're like, oh, we're not where we want to be yet. But if you look at those people in their careers, like it takes time. So that consistency and just not giving up and kind of rolling with the punches is probably my best tip.
I love it. I love it. So for those that want to find you online, if they want to work with you, how can they find you? How can they work with
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is yourlegacybrand.com. That is where you can find out all about branding. I also have TiffanyNeuman.com, which is more of my thought leadership site where people can book me for speaking and things like that. And then my favorite place to hang out social wise is on IG. So on Instagram, I'm at Tiffany Neuman Creative. So I would always love connecting with new people.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And don't worry, everybody, we'll put it in the show notes. You can just go click and go see her stuff and follow her on Instagram. Tiffany, thank you so, so much. This has been wonderful. And I know the audience has loved every minute of it. Here at Legalpreneur, we're committed to providing a supportive legal community for all business owners. I know how scary the legal stuff can be. If you found this information helpful, I would be so grateful if you could share it with a fellow business owner. And quite frankly, it doesn't cost anything to rate, review, or subscribe to the show. Your support helps me reach more listeners, which allows me to support more business owners in their entrepreneurial journey. Have any questions or comments about the show? Feel free to drop me a line on Instagram. I promise I read all of the messages and comments. And if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone that would make a great guest, simply fill out our application form and a team member will reach out if we think it's a good fit. I'll see you in the next episode.